welcome back, everybody. Very pleased to introduce Dame Wendy Hall. Wendy's Professor of Computer Science at the University of Southampton. What you may not know about her, despite all the information that's available, is that Wendy has met David Beckham in Athens. Very pleased to move on with our final keynote of the conference. Let's be open. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, I have jetted in from Australia. No, I've been back 2 days, and that is the worst because I haven't had any sleep for about 2 days. You think you got over it, and there you are, wide awake at 3 o'clock in the morning. But anyway, I'm fine, and I've got to whiz off after this, so we're just going to get into it, right? And this is a slightly new angle on a talk I give a lot, so with some nice new slides with the help of the team in Southampton. So, the title is Let's Be Open About This, rather than Let's Be Open. And I don't know why, that has more of a ring about it, I suppose. And I want to really talk to you about how we've got here before we talk about where we're going, because I think this is really important. It's all about convergence. It's all about, actually, this man pulling a load of stuff together at the right time. So that's Tim Berners-Lee, just in case you don't know. And this is the document he wrote in March 1989. The date's there. You can see it on the web, but of course when he wrote it, there wasn't a web. He didn't even call it the web in this. He called it Information Management and a Proposal. He was at CERN in Geneva, and he had written a system called Inquire. He was trying to help the physicists share information on this newfangled thing called the internet, which of course wasn't that new. It had been around 20 years, but we were beginning to use email. Those of you that remember 1989, we were quite well into using email, and in research labs anyway. And this document actually specifies the thing that he then later called the World Wide Web, the protocols, the standards, and how it would work. And his boss, Mike Sendall, wrote at the top of the document, vague but exciting. And that about sums it up. That gave Tim permission to carry on developing this idea as part of his day job. And the rest, as they say, is history. But of course, Tim was building on the shoulders of giants, that well-misused phrase. But what he was really building on was, if I can remember the list in my jet-lag state, he was building on the open source ideas that were coming out as part of the internet. He was building on the way that the internet was created, the distributed nature of it. He was building on the SGML world, the standard generalized markup language, embedding, putting the links, creating HTML basically, a hypermedia version of that, or his version of it. And he was building on the hypertext. So he added hypertext to that SGML world. And he pulled all those ideas together. And there were lots of other things going on at the time, including our own system, Microcosm, but there were many other hypertext, hypermedia systems at the time. And I talk at length about this in some context, but here are my first shot, and you can come up with others, I expect, of why the web won. Why did the web become the ubiquitous, universal, dominant hypertext system? First of all, and if you understand some of this, then you'll understand how everything we do today works. Or, well, not how, we don't know how it works, but you get some picture of how it works. First of all, the thesis was, and I can remember Tim talking to me about this the first time we met, almost, in terms of he got this in ways that other hypertext researchers, including myself, didn't. That the network was everything, and building on top of the internet was everything, because his vision was that if we're going to have a hypertext system that enables people to share documents, information using hypertext on a global information system, then the network is everything. It has to run on the network, be of the network. And it's the idea that either everyone will use it or nobody will. All right? That is crucial to the web. And if we break that, if we fragment the web in whichever way, then potentially we kill it as it is. There is, of course, a thesis that says a free web campaign will come up, because you can't unknow what you know. But anyway, that's a whole other story. As I said, he was building on the ideas of the internet, so the decentralized was crucial to the web. And again, if you break that, you potentially break it. So that everyone, otherwise it doesn't scale. Everyone has to maintain their own information. And of course, we don't do that very well. So, another really important principle is that Scruffy works. That's what the AI community has learned several times over. There were many hypertext papers at the time that said, if your links are broken or they're dangled or they're dead, your users won't use the system. The web has proved that completely wrong. As long as it's good enough, we were prepared to use it. So error 404 was very important, the idea that you've got to let the links fail to make the thing scale, right? So that we can make mistakes. And we can be amateur at this, and it will still work. But the most important, probably, is the open, free, and universal. I mean, his real legacy was he got the idea, and this is, again, absolutely crucial when you think about building anything on top of the web, or using the web as the service to access the internet, is that he had to give it away to enable the big is beautiful to work. That if there was any barrier in terms of pricing, cost, then people wouldn't use it in the numbers that would be required to make it take off, go viral, as we would say today. And so it was the openness, the universality of the standards, so they're the same across, wherever you are, whichever culture, language you're working in, the API you use to use the web, access the internet is the same. And so those standards are the same. And various commercial vendors have tried to break that, of course, and they eventually give in, because you can't buck the market and get people to try and use your bit of it. They want to be in where everybody else is. You don't want to be in that social... Oh, I'll come back to that in a minute. But it was that giving it away. And he has never sought to make money out of the web. He's never given his name to any particular vendors. And he works tirelessly today to keep it as free and open and as neutral a platform as possible. And that's his legacy. It's also, we owe it to CERN, because CERN in the... I can't remember when it was, 92, 93, said, yeah, we'll give it away too. We're not going to charge for this. If you remember, just before, as the web was beginning to emerge, we had other ways of getting documents from the internet. There were... Gopher? Huh? Well, yes. Yes, Waste was another one. You could FTTP things. Gopher was actually beginning to take off. Quite big, and then the University of, I think it was Minnesota, said, oh, this looks good, we should charge for it. I mean, the first thing we did with our microcosm system was start selling it as a commercial proposition, because that's what you did with software in those days. You patented it and you tried to sell it. So Tim changed the rules, and this is what we've got. Now, this slide is, I use this in every talk I give, because it's so simple, but it's so informative. It's on the web, and it shows one of our PhD students at Southampton keeps this up to date. What he does, he's just got his PhD, so I don't know what I'm going to do if he stops maintaining it. But anyway, I'm sure someone else will step in, guys. Anyway. So, it started with one website. Tim put it up in... I first met him at the European Hypertext Conference in 1990, and then he hadn't called it the World Wide Web. He put the first website up that in his Christmas holiday, and the next year, 91, they called it, he and Robert Caillou called it the World Wide Web. And I remember thinking how pretentious to call it the World Wide Web. It's like the World Series of Baseball. What do you mean? Everyone's going to use this? What? They're going to use my system. But there was nothing there. There was nothing for people to go and look at. I mean, we started playing with the web as soon as it started to actually become available. And it was really quite hard to use initially. And it was very much of the research community in the research labs, because we had the internet, high-speed internet. And it was when these guys came along, Mark Andreessen and co. at NCSA, design Mosaic, which simplified. Tim's interface for the web was both a reader and an editor, because Tim said, well, people want to write, so I'm going to enable them to write. And it made it very complicated. And the Mosaic was just read. And that's what people wanted. It enabled, you just had to get that code and put in a URL, and then you could click on a document and go. There wasn't much to look at, but the aficionados, and I can remember we put our computer science, I think it was Les or Dave, put our computer science lecture notes up using Mosaic on the web for our students to look at in around that time, 92, 93. But it's still very tiny, you know, the world, you know, trying to paint a picture to the world outside of the research community, or even inside the research community, of what a global hypertext system would be, what you would be able to do with one, and why you should bother to put your documents into HTML and put them on the web. You know, people say, why? Why would I want to do that? I've got a perfectly decent document management system. So it's that sort of, how do you get across the idea that until it's built, what it's going to do, because the properties of the web have emerged as we've done stuff with it. You notice that Google doesn't emerge here until nearly 10 years after the web. So there's been some sort of movement to get enough documents up onto the web to make Google, to enable Brin and Page to build Google. And it's the sort of thing you can't theorise about beforehand in terms of doing the experiments. They published their paper in the 1998 conference in Australia with the maths algorithm for what became Google. And the idea, I mean, search engines before Google, remember them? How would you describe them? Painful? They weren't very accurate. They were full of adverts because nobody had worked out how to monetize it, and they weren't. I mean, the concept actually, as this thing was beginning to grow, the concept of thinking about harvesting, from something that was beginning to grow by then, every day, day in, day out, to index all the documents was quite mind-blowing. And what Brin and Page did was they recognised, there's a big science to this, but they recognised that it wasn't just finding the search terms, it was about finding the most popular documents with those search terms. So it was about using the hypertext links to determine which were the pages that they'd found, their system had found that were pointed to by most people, and doing that for every layer. Amazing mathematics. Everyone said, lovely paper, it'll never scale. So then they had to do an amazing feat of engineering, borrow money, borrow students, borrow computers to show that it would scale, and then they had to monetize it. And that all happened actually within a couple of years, but this is all 10 years after the web was first invented. Sorry, I used the wrong term. Tim didn't create the web, I'll come back to that. He invented it. So what's happening here, having pointed that out, is that one of the reasons that the web had taken off was Mosaic, and they were persuaded to commercialise as Netscape Navigator. And Bill Gates famously said, we sell operating systems, the network is irrelevant to us. And then the myth is he changed his mind overnight. I don't know what really happened, but he certainly changed his mind. Decided the network was important, that they needed this thing called a web browser in, and they created Internet Explorer, put it in the operating system, wiped Netscape Navigator out, and really was part of because we were all using Windows machines in those days, it was all part of the build. And Marcus put on here the dot-com bubble, which starts there in the mid-90s, Amazon emerges, and everyone wanted to be like Bill Gates, so the investors piled in, not realising there was no market. Because if you look at the technology trail, we don't get Wi-Fi and broadband until after the turn of the century. So you remember what it was like to use the web before this. You'd use a modem and it would make an awful noise and then time out, and it was just, we called it the World Wide Wait. And if you tried to get an image, it would go like that and then time out. And the idea of having any sort of catalogue to do shopping with was as mad as people who were, after the invention of the printing press, trying to sell books to communities that couldn't read. There's a good business case to take to your investor. Similarly here, and they didn't, and I remember reading, the dot-com bubble burst, and we have had lots of booms and busts since, but I remember reading a probably US broadsheet paper around this time. A lot of people with money had lost a lot of money. And I remember reading from a very worthy journalist an article saying that's the end of internet shopping. The market has proved that nobody wants to buy things on the internet. Right? Well, retrospectively, it was obvious the bubble was going to burst, and it was obvious that was a wrong, to me it was obvious that of course people want to buy on the internet when the technology was there that allowed them to, and you have the combination of the availability of the networks, the computers getting cheaper, the browsers and the technology to use the web getting easier to use, and so it starts to take off. People buy computers, and again, the rest, as they say, is history. We've had sort of 3 phases, and we're going into a 4th now. When it first started, it was read-only, and when you first tried to find things on the web, you would assume it wasn't going to be there, right? Because it was just luck if somebody had happened to produce some information that you wanted. As the browsers became more interactive and developed, people started to write more. So the community, society, started to write things to put on the web. Weblogs, blogs, all that began to emerge. The wikis, and that was an unexpected thing that people would find all that time to do that. And you'd then, in that sort of phase, you'd be hopeful that you'd find information on the web. Well, now, if you look for something on the web, you expect it to be there. If it's not there, then it doesn't exist, basically. I know there's all the stuff about Wikipedia and that, but Wikipedia there's less editors and things, but basically there's more and more information goes up on the web all the time, and really you don't exist as a government or an organisation or a company or a person if you don't have some sort of presence on the web. So we've got the growth of the social networks, and we all thought that the web would, or a hypertext system like the web, would enable, we used to call it the global village, stuff like that, words we use, would enable communities virtual communities to grow. I don't think anybody forecast the social networking that would emerge with the MySpace and then Facebook and Twitter and all the things that we've seen emerge today. But one thing I'll say now, before I forget, is that you have to understand the way the model under which the web evolved, the model that Tim promoted, and a lot of what happened was down to his sheer dogged determination. He is a very, very determined, he was a young man then, not quite so young now, but he was very, very determined, and there will be many theses written about this in the future, is that we have the web as envisaged by Tim. We can analyse why that happened, but it's an experiment that we can't rerun, because we know what we know. If it dies, or people have, attempted, I've seen European project proposals, we're going to rewrite the internet, rewrite the web, do it better. That may happen in the future, and this is so young, it's only 20 odd years old, but we now know what we know. So as I said, if we manage to kill it for whatever reason, if we fragment it too much, or it gets taken over by the wrong people, because the web isn't owned by anybody. It's owned by us. There's nobody else to look after it but us. That's every one of you in this room. There's no company with shareholders. There's no government or UN organisation. They'd like to be. Some governments would like to, and that we have a danger at the moment that some governments are going to say, we need a separate internet because you're spying on us, and this is all dangerous stuff. And every so often you get this new dangers emerge, but actually it is of the people. So when I said Tim didn't create the web, he invented it, but we create it. And this is true of everything that happens on the web, that is of the web. They're not services, but things that grow on the web in the mode of the web. They have this sort of curve where nobody's using it, and somehow or other, the magic of it going viral, so everyone uses it. And once everyone's using it, it's impossible to knock that particular monolith off its pedestal. So how would you take on Facebook? How would you begin to develop a social network to take on Facebook? I mean, Google Plus have tried, and there are smaller ones, but generally there's a dominant one. In the mathematics of it, they're giant attractors. There's one Twitter. There's one Amazon. You know, there are other shops, of course. We're seeing the revolution in the high street. But there's one auction house. There's one eBay. There's one YouTube. You know, because there's no point in you putting your video where no one's going to go. You have to put your video where everyone's going to look at it. So you have to. It's the network effect. And there's this amazing dichotomy that you start off with nobody using your system, and then you have to do whatever you've got to do, and that generally includes giving it away. You're not going to make... I mean, look at Twitter. What was it? It's on the news. It's being valued at 8 billion, 7 billion, 8 billion. Made a huge loss last year, right? But there is only one of them, and everyone's convinced they're going to make money, and same with Facebook. Google, there's one search engine. As these systems emerge, then there are competitors. But once you've got that network effect and it's working, I mean, there were other Wikipedias before Wikipedia, but there were other online sites. I must speed up. I could talk forever to this slide, but this is really important as you think about stuff going forward. So the web is a network of networks. I've talked about, you know, we're in this world where, the social networking world, where, you know, we put all our photos, our videos, MySpace became Facebook, all these stories that we now know. Things like, I mean, Wikipedia is an absolutely amazing, and I've got David Beckham here in my slides. Well, I was in Malaysia and I thought, well, I'll put up a slide of the Malaysian Wikipedia, and who will they know? I thought about the Queen. I thought, no, they might not go down that well in Malaysia, so I put David Beckham up. Of course, they've all heard of David Beckham. Just, I mean, you know, it's just amazing. I was looking at the Encyclopedia Britannica. The last printed version was 37 volumes, I think. It was at the 30-something volumes, the last printed. They don't print now. They still exist as a company. There is still one online that you pay for access to. And if Wikipedia fails, maybe that's what we'll have to use. But Wikipedia, it's been estimated that if you printed it out, it would be equivalent to 1,900 volumes of the Encyclopedia Britannica, all hyperlinked. Absolutely amazing, and growing all the time. Lots of interest. I mean, it's also developed its governance, its own rules of governance. Quite a phenomenon that wasn't predicted, and I mean, Jimmy Wales didn't think it would work when he kicked it off, and we're still worried about how it will go forward in the future. It's still very young, but just swamped, and the industry. So when the power cuts come, which I think they're going to come this winter, did you see the stuff on the news? Brian, how much have we told them about this? Anyway, surprise, surprise, they've underestimated, or whatever it is. But anyway, when the power cuts come, you won't be able to look things up. You won't even be able to look up the phone number to ring somebody to say, how do I, you know, when's the next train? All in this very short space of time, we have dismantled the industries that we used to use to get information. This is why this is so, so, so important. Entertainment. Now, this is an interesting one. YouTube, I mean, it's wonderful, isn't it? Right? And if you've got a video to distribute, you put it on YouTube. The broadcasting companies have their channels. I can't just see the Doctor Who programmes. I can look at a whole load of stuff about Doctor Who that is either put there by the BBC or all the fans, and it's just amazing. A whole new way of getting entertainment, and there's one of those. And who owns it? Google. And where are we putting our MOOCs? On YouTube. And Google has just done a deal with Harvard for edX to develop that platform as open source. So Google has all the elements to become the worldwide university. Watch this space. Anyway, they haven't joined up the dots yet, I don't think, but I have. So we'll come back to MOOCs. Twitter, my favourite. I love Twitter. I mean, I can't do all the social networks. My husband does the Facebook family and friends stuff for us. He's got more time than me. I love Twitter. I love telling people what I'm doing. I'm a great show-off. I like to tell people I'm awake at 3 o'clock in the morning. But also, I mean, so this is the beginning of Twitter, when it started on mobile phones and then moved to the web, and you get early adopters like one Nigel Shadbolt, and Stephen Fry is here. I mean, he was on Twitter before this, but why we put this on here is this green line is the growth of the iPhone, and this is where 3G became available. And Stephen Fry tweeted in a lift in London in July 2008 that he was stuck in the lift, and he used his new iPhone 3G to do it. And that was the beginning of the change, the takeoff. I mean, it was beginning to take off, but it really started to take off with the development of the mobile phone industry. And, you see the things that have become, in part of the story of Twitter, the flight Miracle on the Hudson, some of the Australian bushfires. I joined there, I'm a late adopter. But I can't show all of Chris's slides, but one of our students has done some lovely slides showing how Twitter has grown. And this is the sort of the amazing, how it's gone from being what I had for breakfast to something that helps us sort out disasters. It's how a lot of us get our news. And the numbers, it's associated with revolution, and the numbers that you see here. The World Cup was a big one. Actually, Chris, we should put the Obama election on here. I saw this morning that his tweet that said 4 more years is the most retweeted ever, I think. Dreadfully, Katy Perry has, because it's all in the news this morning about Twitter. Katy Perry has the most followers. Who is she? Anyway, I'm sure a lot of you know. She has the most followers on Twitter. But look at this, in London 2012, when this is for everyone, that did his profile a lot of good as well. 80,000 tweets per second in the Olympics, and just growing all the time. So a lot of people when these sorts of things happen, people register. These are the registered but not used. These are the actives. And anyway, it's an amazing phenomenon that is of us, right? We make it, right? The technology that came out evolves because of what we do with it. So it's not a one-way thing at all. So openness. A few things about openness. Open research. I want to brag a bit, because next year is the 20th anniversary of Les and I, and was Stephen involved? The Open Journal project? Can't remember, not maybe at the beginning. 1994, this is a web page from back then. This was 1999, which is why this project was funded by JISC in 1994. 1994, if you remember that web curve, this is very early days in the web, and we were talking about open access, really. That's what this was about. It was about the fact that we would put our papers online, and it would be easier to access them, and we'd have hyperlinks in them. That's what the project was about. And we went round, didn't we, Les? Every university saying, this is what you're going to do. And everyone said, well, why? Why would I do that? I get my paper, I can read that on the train, and just it was a transformational project in the sense it did get people thinking about it, but it was like it was just banging your head against a brick wall to get people to think, because the web hadn't really taken off at that point. And the idea that the publishing industry was going to completely die, and we would move in the sense that the paper version, and we would move to this electronic, what's now called open access way of doing things, was just, and this is only 19 years ago. And the story's clearly not finished yet, it's a long way to go, but we kept it going, the idea, and with Stephen Harnad developed the ePrint service. Les runs this, which is one of two. I don't know if I am going to brag again, actually, because I'm in this audience. Rob Tansley, who wrote the first version of ePrints, was poached by Hewlett-Packard to write the first version of DSpace. And then he was poached by Google to write their document, whatever it was they did in the world of documents and scholarly publishing, the first version of, and he was my PhD student. And so it was that trail of, I'm really proud, you know, of these sorts of things. As you get old, you look back and you think, wow. So you know, this is because the web has enabled, and what people don't get is it has to be free, and then it will commercial services will emerge around it in order for it to take off, and the technology's got to be there. I mean, I would admit, when we were talking to the scientists back in 1994. And they said, I like reading my papers on the train. We couldn't give them a solution for reading their papers on the train electronically in 1994. Well, I would admit that. But they could, you know, it's the idea that people only think about ideas with the current technology. They don't think about what it might be like in the future. Another example for open research is the work Carol Goebel and Dave DeRoa and many others have done on by experiment and workbenches for researchers. I need to speed up a bit, and that's so. Open data. Well, just to tell you a little bit of the story of how we got to open data. It was always this idea of the semantic web was always part of Tim's original vision. He talked about it at the first web conference in 1994. He then let it go, really, because it was too complicated to get people to put documents on the web and link them, let alone data. And so he sort of, once the web began to take off, he bided his time, and then I remember him talking about it at the Australian conference in '98. That was quite a conference, because that was the Google paper conference as well, and Ted Nelson was there, which was amazing. If anyone knows Ted Nelson and Zigzag, I will say now there is a one-to-one correspondence between Zigzag and the semantic web. And Tim and Ted were at that conference trying to explain their systems to each other, and absolutely, you know, they will not accept, either of them, that they're talking about the same thing. But anyway, so it was always part of Tim's vision to have not just a web of documents, but a web of data, because machines can process data as long as you describe it, in a way they can't process documents. So we potentially get answers to questions rather than lists of links. And this whole idea of that the linking data is about creating a semantic relationship between two objects. Could be documents, could be people, could be the internet of data from the Internet of Things, anything. And Tim's vision was, if we do this, then we will actually solve problems we couldn't have solved in any other way. As a global community. And we're not quite there yet, but we will get, his vision is we'll get knowledge that we couldn't have got in any other way. Now, what happened was that so I blame Jim Hendler, and he takes some of the blame, is that around the time of the turn of the century, I think it was around the Hawaii conference time, that was the first conference that Jim came to in 2002, anyway, something like that. But Tim had started talking to the AI community about the semantic web. And it went down what I call an AI rat hole. All right, it went down in the upside-down A's, backward E's, lots of description logic. I'm going to prove my ontology is complete AI world. Absolutely wonderful research. No problem with that. But it doesn't get it built. Right? It doesn't get it built. And, you know, the lesson we should have learnt from the web, which is what we started to look back at in 2004, 2005, was that you have to, with this stuff, get it out there, get people putting content in, and then you can start building the tools you need to really use it. And it's a social shaping activity. And so this is what was not happening with the semantic web. There was no data out there. So it was all theory. And nobody could see what anyone was talking about. Nothing was moving. So we started talking, I say we, by this time Nigel had moved to Southampton, and we famously had dinner in New York with Tim and Danny Weitzner in 2004, and we said, what do we do about this? How do we get the semantic web moving? Actually, we started by creating Web Science, I'll come back to that, but we also wrote this paper that said, you just got to simplify it all, don't overcomplicate it. And as Tim says on his TED video, you gave me your documents, now give me your data. And this is the paper that says, just keep it simple. Get the data out there in a standard format. Give everything a URI and link it. And that's basically what it's about. Now, that was still too complicated for people. But of course, we do know we're in the age of data now. So it isn't just about building the web of linked data. It's about big data and open data and broad data. And there's data everywhere, and suddenly we're all going to be data scientists. And it's great because it's a new way of doing science. It's a new way of doing finance. It's a new brave world. But the key thing has been to try and get the data out there for not just the scientific data, that we have lots of climate data and a lot of physics data and chemistry data and all that, but data that makes the world tick in the sense of businesses and finances and governments. And a tipping point for this was the Obama election, when he was, there was they didn't have much money, and they were saying we're going to tell you how we spend the tax dollar, and we're going to be open about this and transparent. We're going to publish the data about what we're doing, and we're going to use these web standards that this Tim Berners-Lee's been telling us about. And then Tim famously went to lunch with Gordon Brown at Chequers in that summer, 2009. And I can't do the Scottish accent, but Gordon Brown said, "How can I help?" And Tim said, "Give me your data." And within a week, Tim and Nigel were at number 10 talking about a data.gov.uk. And that is actually how it happened. So then we had this, the war across the ponds of who's got more data and all that. But actually, and Jim's been helping, with all the data.gov on the other side of the pond. But this spawned lots of other, I haven't got the slides in, but lots of other government cities doing this. And it is now, of course, the Open Data Summit was last week in London, and there's, Open Government. This is all part of the Open Government initiatives. It's a big movement, and it's been a tipping point because more and more people are getting data out there, and businesses are now beginning to think, oh, maybe there's something in this for us. Governments are doing it for all sorts of reasons. They're not doing it to altruistically build the semantic web. They're doing it for transparency, improve public services, accountability, efficiency. But it's all helping hugely. Our government funded the Open Data Institute that Tim and Nigel chair and are president of, and they had a big event last week. They spawned 13 other Open Data Institutes. And things like, this is one Nigel likes to talk about, this is GPs prescribing statins. The data for that shows the red blobs are where they're prescribing the more expensive proprietary statins. Funnily enough, in the poorer parts of the country, and the light blobs are where they prescribe more generic ones. If you could change the behaviour of the people that prescribe the proprietary ones, you could save about 200 million. And you could do that sort of stuff across government data. I haven't got time to go into that story. I want to tell a couple of others. How am I doing on time, Ian? Right. So, where was I? Right, government data. The key thing is that this story isn't finished. This is getting it open, but linking is what will bring the rewards. And that's the next phase of all this. Tim said that at some of the press releases last week. We're doing open data from Southampton. We're changing our whole ICT strategy to be data-driven, but we run a open data site, and there is a movement for more and more universities. There's a data.ac.uk, is it? It's something like that. Increasingly, universities are putting out data about their estate and what contractors they use and where they spend their money, but also courses and tutors and all sorts of stuff that people will then be able to aggregate. And I could give you a whole talk about what might happen. Now, that leads us on to open learning. That's something that I've been involved with for a long time. And I was looking up today, because I've just come back from Australia, and I was at the conference centre where the first time I went to Australia was in 1990 for the World Conference in Education, Computers in Education. And some of you might remember Hutch, and Les and I had this paper on using hypermedia as an effective tool for education. The application was cell biology. And I was thinking, when I was in Australia this week, there we were in Darling Harbour, all talking about these amazing things we were going to do with computers in education, just before the web emerged, which changed everything, just everything. And I remember we used to evaluate hypermedia systems, and they'd have a few hundred slides, maybe. That was a lot, and some links. and we'd get users to sit and use them, and we'd ask them how they felt. Was it better than being given, going to a class and you get yes or no or maybe? And actually it was all about to change forever. Within 2 years we were putting our course notes on this new thing called the web. And then 5 years later, at the World Conference on Computer Education, we were talking about resource-based learning. And then by 2002, I was talking about web-based medical education. And in 2004, this one was about having a hybrid. So this was a textbook that we used semantic, links to link to other resources. Right? This is all on the web. 2004, that was the year Facebook came out. It was all about to change again. We were going to get social networking. That has changed everything. That is what's going to change, potentially, profoundly, education across the world. Through these things, now I heard somebody said that the Vice-Chancellor today said MOOCs will be gone by next year. They might not be called MOOCs, but this is profound. I've been talking about, all my career, and with others, about how computers, and ever since the first computers, people have talked about use of them in education. And Seymour Papert, who was one of my idols when I was a young lecturer, and he was the professor of epidemiology. My brain's gone. Thinking stuff. Is it epidemiology? I can't remember. Anyway. Huh? Epistemology. Right. Anyway, he wrote a book called Mindstorms, and he did the logo, turtle. And he famously said, if an alien landed on the planet 100 years ago and then came back today, everything we do, every process was changed. The way we travel, the way we access information, the way our banks work, the way manufacturing works, everything except education. We're all still sitting here, you're listening to me talk, and I've got some slides up there, and we still have buildings that we do education in, and people come to them. And of course there's the social aspect of that, absolutely. But also there wasn't the affordance of actually being able to teach people across networks in a way that we're beginning to explore now. And because we've learnt about social networking, this idea of actually managing classes across a network of thousands of people works, because they'll all help each other. Now, it won't be the same experience as 100 people coming to listen to my lectures on computer science. Do I do any lectures? Anyway. But it will, if you live in the middle of Africa or China or somewhere else that's, you can't afford to go and live in the West or even a big town in your country, this could help you get educated. And this is, it may not be called MOOCs next year. In fact, Harvard had already come up with Spock, because we have to find ways, we have to give it away. This was the key thing that we didn't get before. We hadn't learned the lesson. We have to give it away first. This is the massively open online, and then we'll work out how to manage it. So Harvard are coming up with Spock. There'll be lots of other acronyms, and universities will try and think of ways, because they've got to monetize this. But as I said before, Google actually hold all the cards now. And all they've got to do is the deals with the big institutions to mop up. Potentially 5, thank you. Well, I won't show the video then. I'll just plug. We are about to launch a MOOC on Web Science at Future Learn. There's lots of MOOCs coming out. I won't show you the video. If you look on the website, there is a lovely trailer with Nigel and me and Les and Susan Halford, and telling you what Web Science is. And really, at the moment, I think about this as marketing, because I'm pragmatic and I want to get people on our new Web Science undergraduate degree course. So for me, this is great, because it's really professionally produced marketing, which hopefully will get people coming in the traditional way. But over time, that is going to change, and it will be very hybrid to start with. So I won't show you the video, I haven't got time, but this is about, Web Science is about, this is what we called it in 2004 when we were talking to Tim about how the web had grown, what it was, what the phenomenon, what this thing was that we had all created, we being society. It's a hugely complex macro phenomenon. It's ecosystem we don't understand. It's socio-technical and it's interdisciplinary. Lots of different disciplines come together. Education should be here. Is economics on there? Yes. You have to sort of have some understanding of these different cultures and languages or at least know how to talk to people in them to really begin to understand this web thing. So I've got to tell you about social machines and Web Observatory in 5 minutes. So key drivers in all this, and I've put up here the catapult. I'm on the board of this now, so I'm beginning to get to understand what they do. The government have funded this to the Connected Digital Economy Catapult. I don't know how it's going to work out, but there's a lot of money there to play with digital economy stuff and innovation. And it's like the Open Data Institute, and this is potentially going to get people innovating around data, hopefully linked data. And all this brings us to this idea of interoperation. And I want to finish with two ideas. One is that what I've been saying, that Tim didn't create the web, he invented it. And he used to be introduced as the inventor of the web, the creator of the web, until somebody in the audience said to him one day, you couldn't have created the web, you couldn't have written all those words, you didn't have time. And what I've been trying to talk about in this how this economy works is that it isn't just of the machine, it's of us and the machine. And Tim, again, he's always there, had called that a social machine. And our social science friends tell us about the fact that as engineers and computer scientists, we think of things from a point of view of technological determinism. We're going to build this system and it will do this, this, and this. Well, that's not how social scientists think of things. They think of social shaping. And that's what web and the things of the web are socially shaped. They talk about co-constitution because the technology goes out there and then we do stuff with it and the technology evolves. And we change as a society, but the technology is changed. It's mutually constitutive. And this comes, the term social machine, and you have to sort of suspend, this isn't a normal machine, this is like machine power, as in the technology, computer type machine, Turing type machine, that power and brain power. It's not artificial intelligence. Over time there will be more of that, but it's about those two networks coming together to create something that couldn't have existed before. Tim talked about it in his book, Weaving the Web. In the middle there, he says, computers help if we can use them to create abstract social machines on the web, processes in which people do the creativity and machine does the administration. And that's sort of where we are today. I'm going to whiz through everything I've been talking about, I think, is an example of a social machine. We have a big project at Southampton with Oxford and Edinburgh where we're looking at the theory and practice of social machines, and that's how I think of web science in a scientific way. That's what we're studying. We've got to learn how to build them, how they work, how they fail. And one thing is they're not Turing machines. They don't have conventional algorithmic components. They have bits of that because they're Turing machines involved. A social machine will start with an incomplete specification and grow and evolve. It has, you've got to incentivize people to use it. It achieves participation through local incentives, has a notion of completeness that is social rather than mathematical, and it will not usually have a notion of correct output or termination, runs and evolves continuously. That's the sort of thing we're exploring. Now, I just want to finish by talking to you about an idea that has emerged from all this area, which I think is really important going forward, which is this idea of how do we know, how do we understand this world? How do we understand how social machines work? How do we understand what makes them fail? What makes them good for humanity and what makes them potentially bad for humanity? What could go wrong? How do we advise governments? How do we advise companies? And there's this idea that we need to observe the web. This is not PRISM. This is not observing individuals. This is observing the web and our behaviour on the web as a herd. And we talk in the Socium project about the Web Observatory. understanding social machines, we think we need to build this idea of drawing from what the physicists do, which is they observe the stars using the telescopes, and then they share that data, and the way they analyse that data to create the picture of the heavens, and climate scientists are doing it to understand the physical planet. We think we need to help us understand the digital planet, to monitor trends, to understand behaviours and how these machines come and go. Is we need to have longitudinal studies, and we need to be observing. And that means we need to be looking at what people are doing with Twitter and Facebook and anything we experiment with, and Ushahidi and anything else. And there are people all around the world gathering this type of data. We're doing stuff at Southampton. We have a pilot observatory there, and one of the things we do is Twitter analysis. Here's Ramin's work on, this is an unfiltered network of retweets, and applying an algorithm that filters it to see who's actually talking to who. This was the November the 9th, the protests about student fees, and you can see that the BBC's putting a lot out, but they're completely disconnected from the network of people who are actually running the streets of London. And analyse, it's just, and you can link that with what was happening on Google and Wikipedia, and we have to harvest a lot of this data, and we need to preserve it, curate it, and share it with other people, share the tools that we're using. So it's about trying to build across the planet a network of web observatories and guidelines for what it means to be a web observatory. That means having licenses and terms for how you put your data out. Is it open? Or if it's not open, what is it? Under what terms can you use it? Do you have to pay to use this tool, or is it free? All that sort of stuff. And this is what we're looking at. The Web Science Trust coordinates this. We're beginning to build partners. We're about to issue in the next, maybe in the new year, in the next few weeks, the guidelines for what it means to be an observatory, rather like people did with the open access world. This is what you've got to do to say, I'm publishing my papers in an open access way. I want to finish because I've got to get a train, because I've got to speak at the Royal Society this afternoon. And so our ambition is very small. We want to map the digital universe in order to understand, to give business intelligence, and to help drive forward the digital economy agenda. So we're in what I think a perfect storm. I'm not sure about, there's never a perfect storm. We're in a time when this whole idea about openness is changing everything that we do, the way we do business, the way we do research, the way we teach, the way we have our healthcare, everything. And I'm just trying to explain some of that and help you understand, share our vision of what we need to do to derive understanding and help build better systems for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There is a car waiting. I think you're going to have to go. So.
Well, just do a couple. Go on.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure.
Fine. Okay. So time for questions.
Quick, and then I'm going to run.
Right. I'll leave it
Anyone
to you to choose when you want to run.
Do you just quick comments? Yes.
Yep. You were first there. Yep.
Hi, my name is from Lancaster University. Love the fact that you ended up with the perfect storm slide, because a book written by Tim's brother, Mike, described the perfect storm for research is the burning question. And I really loved when you described the web that is in our hands, and we can destroy it. And I noticed how kind of the web is growing to mimic. It's almost a metaphor of the planet.
Yes.
So my question is...
Yes, that's very true.
If you read The Burning Question, you know that at stake is the sustainability of the human species.
Absolutely.
On this planet.
Yes.
So what...
Someone recording this, go on.
We are doing what we can, okay, teaching and doing research. What are you doing? What is governance doing?
My answer to that is the Web Observatory.
Okay.
Because your point is absolutely well made. You made it better than I did, because it is of us. It is up to us to look after it. And the sustainability of the planet is as much in this world as it is in understanding climate science, because you can't do climate science without a web and an internet. And and power supplies and everything. Brian and I wrote this report for government about how all these critical infrastructures are all interconnected and all around this type of technology. So my answer is the Web Observatory, because I think it's the only way to get it. Well, one thing's for sure, the Web Observatory will not be what I think it will be. It's a social machine. We have to get people doing it. And I don't know what the consequences will be, but it raises, when we talk about it, it gets the UNESCO's and the UN's and governments interested. And I think if we start demonstrating how we can do this type of thinking using a vehicle like a Web Observatory, we might get attention.
Just a quick one. I love the fact that you call it as a social shaping dynamic. So not just like shaping the communities, but also the governance.
Yeah. I probably ought to go. Because I'm not only at the Royal Society, but the Duke of York is introducing me. And I can't be there after him.
Can you join me in thanking Dame Wendy Hall again?